For as long as I can remember, I had dreamed of owning a piece of land where I could see the horizon. Not a cookie-cutter suburban lot where I could reach out my window and touch my neighbor's house, but somewhere with space to breathe. Somewhere I could build a life without feeling confined by the invisible walls of urban living. After 15 years of saving, planning, and waiting for the perfect opportunity, I finally found it. A 10-acre ranch property on the outskirts of Willow Creek Estates. The property was everything I had envisioned. Rolling gentle hills covered in wildflowers that caught the evening light. A small creek cutting through the back corner, providing natural irrigation and the soothing sound of running water. Ancient oak trees that provided perfect shade for summer afternoons. It was located just far enough from town to feel private, but close enough for convenience. The previous owner had maintained the land beautifully, but was moving to be closer to grandchildren. I remember the day I first drove down that winding country road. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, creating dappled patterns on the dusty path. Birds called to each other overhead as butterflies danced among the wildflowers. When the realtor's car pulled over and she pointed to the property, I knew immediately this was home. The sense of peace that washed over me was undeniable. This was the place I had worked my entire adult life to find. The closing process went smoothly. I secured a good mortgage rate thanks to years of careful financial planning. The property inspection revealed only minor issues that the seller agreed to fix before finalizing the sale. The title search came back clean. When the realtor mentioned there was technically an HOA associated with the property, she assured me it was essentially dormant. They have not collected dues or enforced regulations in years, she explained. Most residents have forgotten it even exists. After moving in, I spent the first 2 weeks meeting my neighbors. The Johnson family to the east brought over a homemade apple pie. The elderly couple across the road, the Wilsons, shared stories of how the area had changed over the 40 years they had lived there. Everyone seemed genuinely warm and welcoming. No one mentioned anything about HOA regulations or restrictions. I felt like I had found not just a perfect property but a real community. My first major project was to install a proper entrance gate. Nothing ostentatious or imposing, just a simple, rustic wooden ranch gate that would mark the entrance to my property while complementing the natural surroundings. I hired a local craftsman who specialized in custom woodwork. Together, we designed something beautiful yet practical, 2 posts of natural stone supporting swinging wooden gates with decorative wrought iron accents. It took 3 weeks to complete, and when finished, it perfectly framed the view of my property from the road. Then came that fateful Tuesday morning. I was enjoying coffee on my front porch, watching the sunrise cast long shadows across my land, when I noticed the mail carrier placing a certified letter in my box. The official envelope seemed out of place in such a peaceful setting. When I opened it, my hands actually started trembling. The letter was from Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, an organization I had been told was inactive. It stated in cold, formal language that my newly installed gate violated Section 8, Paragraph 12 of the community bylaws regarding unauthorized structural modifications visible from common areas. The letter demanded immediate removal of the gate within 48 hours, or I would face daily fines of $200. It was signed by someone named Corinne Harrington, HOA president. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Perhaps next time you will consult the HOA before making unauthorized changes to community aesthetic standards. The dismissive, condescending tone made my blood run cold. I stared out across my beautiful property, the morning light suddenly seeming less bright, as I realized my rural dream might not be as secure as I had thought. The certified letter sat on my kitchen counter like a bomb that had yet to detonate. I could not stop reading it, searching for some loophole, some explanation that would make this situation go away. How could an inactive HOA suddenly spring to life and threaten my property rights? Something did not add up. I decided to dig deeper before taking any action regarding my gate. That evening, I spread documents across my dining table, property deeds, the closing paperwork, the sparse HOA materials I had received during purchase. I pored over everything line by line, searching for answers. According to my paperwork, the HOA had not collected dues in over 7 years. The bylaws provided at closing were dated 2008 and made no mention of approval requirements for entrance gates on properties larger than 5 acres, which mine certainly was. I decided to visit the county record's office the next morning. The clerk, a woman named Martha with glasses perched on the end of her nose, helped me access the official HOA records. What I discovered was revealing. The HOA had indeed been dormant for years until approximately 8 months ago when leadership suddenly changed hands. The new president was Corinne Harrington, the same person who had signed my violation notice. Even more interesting, the records showed that Corinne had systematically purchased 4 properties within Willow Creek Estates over the past 3 years. She has been quite active in changing the bylaws too, Martha noted, pulling additional files. There have been 17 amendments filed in just the past 6 months. That is highly unusual for an established HOA. The amendments primarily focused on expanding the Architectural Review Committee powers and increasing potential fines for violations. It was starting to look less like community governance and more like a power grab. My next stop was to visit the Wilsons, the elderly couple who had lived in the community for decades. Mr. Wilson invited me in for lemonade while his wife pulled out photo albums showing the neighborhood through the years. The HOA was created when the development first started, Mr. Wilson explained, his weathered hands turning album pages. But it was always meant to be minimal, just basic things like preventing junk cars in yards or houses painted neon colors. Mrs. Wilson nodded in agreement. Everything changed when that Harrington woman moved in. First, she volunteered for everything. Then somehow she got herself elected president when nobody else wanted the job. Now she runs the place like her personal kingdom. She lowered her voice. She forced the Abernathys to tear down their gazebo last month. They had it for 15 years without issue. And poor Mrs. Johnson had to remove her rose trellis because Corinne claimed it was an unauthorized structure. Armed with this information, I decided to attend the monthly HOA meeting scheduled for that Friday evening. The community center was smaller than I expected, with about 30 folding chairs arranged in rows facing a table at the front. Corinne Harrington sat center stage, flanked by 2 other board members who remained silent throughout the proceedings. She was a polished woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair, wearing a crisp blazer despite the casual setting. Corinne ran the meeting with ruthless efficiency, cutting off questions, dismissing concerns, and moving quickly through agenda items. When someone raised an issue about inconsistent enforcement of lawn maintenance standards, she simply stated, "The board has discretion to prioritize violations that impact community value." When another resident asked about the sudden increase in architectural review requirements, Corinne responded that maintaining aesthetic cohesion is essential to property values. When the meeting opened for new business, I raised my hand. "I would like to discuss the notice I received about my entrance gate," I stated calmly. Every head turned toward me. Corinne looked down at her papers, not making eye contact. "That matter has already been decided by the Architectural Review Committee," she replied dismissively. Next item. "But my property is over 5 acres, I persisted. "The original bylaws exempt larger properties from certain restrictions." Corinne finally looked at me, her gaze cold. "The bylaws were amended in February. All properties, regardless of size, must now conform to unified standards. Perhaps if you had attended meetings regularly, you would know that. The room fell uncomfortably silent. I noticed several residents looking down, unwilling to meet my eyes or get involved. Karen had clearly established a climate of intimidation. The following day, I consulted with a general practice attorney named David Reynolds, whose office occupied a small suite in a historic downtown building. The wood-paneled walls and leather-bound books gave an impression of stability that I desperately needed. Unfortunately, his assessment was not encouraging. HOAs have tremendous legal power in this state, David explained, removing his glasses to clean them. Courts generally uphold their right to enforce bylaws, even ones that seem arbitrary or recently changed. He reviewed my documents, shaking his head slightly. They appear to have followed proper procedure for the amendments. Fighting this directly would be costly and with limited chance of success. I drove home with a heavy heart, gripping the steering wheel tightly as I considered my options. The attorney had essentially told me I had no recourse, that this woman could dictate what I could do on my own property simply because she had manipulated a previously dormant system. As I turned onto the winding road leading to my ranch, watching the sunset paint the horizon in shades of amber and gold, determination replaced my initial shock. There had to be a way to fight back. I just needed to find it. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. If a general practice attorney could not help me, perhaps I needed someone with specialized knowledge. Through online research, I found Thomas Blackwell, an attorney who specifically handled HOA disputes and had successfully represented homeowners against overreaching associations. His office was a 2-hour drive away, but I scheduled an appointment immediately. Unlike the traditional law office I had visited before, Thomas worked from a modern space with walls covered in framed newspaper clippings chronicling his victories against various homeowner associations. HOA overreach stopped, read one headline. Court rules against excessive architectural controls, proclaimed another. These were exactly the success stories I needed to see. Many people assume HOAs are invincible, Thomas said after listening to my situation. But they are legal entities that must follow proper procedures and state laws. The stronger they appear, the more likely they have cut corners somewhere. He pulled out a legal pad and began taking detailed notes as I shared everything I had discovered about Corinne and the suddenly revived HOA. Thomas requested copies of all my documents, plus the original development plans if I could obtain them. The devil is in the details with these cases, he explained. HOAs rely on homeowners feeling powerless and giving up, but sometimes the solution is hiding in plain sight in the founding documents. Over the next 2 weeks, Thomas and I dove deep into the history of Willow Creek Estates. We examined the original development plans filed with the county in 1995, the articles of incorporation for the HOA, and every amendment filed since. Martha at the county records office became an invaluable ally, helping us access documents that were not digitized and required special permission to view. Then came our first breakthrough. According to the original development plans, the main road serving the community, Willow Creek Road, was designated as private property to be transferred to HOA ownership after the development was completed. However, we could find no record that this transfer had ever been legally executed. The developer had filed the intention to transfer, but never completed the final paperwork before the company dissolved in 2005. This is significant, Thomas said, circling the relevant section in the plans. If the road was never properly transferred to HOA ownership, it technically remains unowned property or possibly still belongs to the defunct development company's assets. Our second discovery was even more promising. In her haste to consolidate power, Corinne had filed numerous amendments to the HOA bylaws. But Thomas noticed that several critical amendments, including the one expanding architectural control to all properties regardless of size, had been filed without the required notarization. Additionally, the state law required that major bylaw changes be approved by at least 67% of homeowners, but we could find no evidence of any vote reaching that threshold. She has been operating on the assumption that no one would check her work, Thomas said, a smile forming. And that is exactly the kind of mistake that can undermine her authority. We spent a full day in Thomas's office, documents spread across a large conference table, mapping out potential strategies. The road ownership issue is your strongest leverage, he advised. If we can establish that the HOA does not legally own or control the road, their authority becomes significantly limited. Thomas explained that we needed to move carefully. If Corinne realizes what we are investigating, she might try to quickly correct these oversights. We need to work quietly until we are ready to make our move. The legal strategy became clear. Form a business entity that could potentially acquire ownership of the unowned road, then use that position to negotiate from strength rather than weakness. It was audacious but legally sound. Corinne had used the letter of the law to exert control. We would use it to reclaim that control. This will not be quick or simple, Thomas warned. We need to establish a legitimate business entity, conduct proper title searches, file appropriate paperwork, and be prepared for potential countermoves. I nodded, understanding the complexity but feeling a renewed sense of hope. For the first time since receiving that certified letter, I felt like I had a fighting chance. As we concluded our strategy session, Thomas and I shook hands firmly. His expression was serious but confident. Document everything from this point forward, he advised. And most importantly, give no indication to Corinne or anyone else what we are planning. The element of surprise will be crucial. I left his office with a plan of action and the name of a business attorney who could help me establish the entity we would need for the next phase. During the drive home, watching the countryside roll past my windows, I felt a strange mixture of nervousness and excitement. I was about to enter a battle I never expected to fight when I purchased my dream property. But some things are worth fighting for, and my right to enjoy my own land on my own terms was definitely one of them. With a legal strategy taking shape, I realized I needed more than just documentation and attorneys. I needed allies within the community, people who understood the situation and might be willing to support my efforts. Based on reactions at the HOA meeting, I suspected many residents shared my frustration with Corinne, but were too intimidated to speak up individually. I began with casual conversations, inviting neighbors over for coffee or stopping to chat when I saw them outside. Without revealing my specific plans, I would steer conversations toward community issues and listen carefully to their experiences. The stories people shared confirmed what the Wilsons had told me. Corinne had been systematically bullying residents for months. The Martinezes had been forced to remove a small memorial garden they had created for their deceased daughter because it contained non-approved plants. The Thompsons had received violations for their children's basketball hoop, despite several other identical hoops in the neighborhood going unsighted. Elderly Mrs. Parker had been threatened with legal action over her bird feeders attracting nuisance wildlife. The pattern was clear. Corinne wielded HOA power arbitrarily and often cruelly. I began hosting small gatherings at my home, careful to make them appear as friendly get-togethers rather than organized meetings. During one such evening, Robert Chen, a software engineer who lived 3 houses down from Corinne, revealed something particularly telling. She always inspects properties on Tuesdays and issues violation notices on Wednesdays, he explained, but never to certain homes, like the Bakers or the Drummonds. I noticed they all donated to her campaign for city council last year. This information prompted me to begin documenting inconsistencies in enforcement. I discreetly photographed properties throughout the neighborhood, noting those with technical violations that went uncited compared to those that received notices for identical issues. I created a detailed spreadsheet tracking patterns of selective enforcement, building a compelling case of discriminatory practices. My relationship with Martha at the county records office continued to develop as I made regular visits to research property documents and HOA filings. Initially professional and reserved, her demeanor changed when I mentioned Corinne's threat to fine an elderly resident for a wheelchair ramp installation. "That woman has been throwing her weight around all over town," Martha confided, lowering her voice despite the empty office. "She tried to get my nephew fired from the parks department when he would not give her special permission for a private event." Martha began setting aside relevant documents she came across during her regular work, providing crucial insights into Corinne's other business dealings and property holdings in the area. Her institutional knowledge proved invaluable, especially when she located the original transfer paperwork for Willow Creek Road that had never been properly completed, the cornerstone of our legal strategy. Perhaps my most important ally came unexpectedly. Michael Donovan owned the largest property in Willow Creek Estates aside from mine, a modern architectural home situated on 3 acres at the end of the road. He had made his fortune in tech and had retired early to pursue passion projects. At one of my small gatherings, he lingered after others had left. "I know what you are doing," he said directly, swirling a glass of scotch. "You are building a case against Corinne and the HOA." Before I could respond, he continued, "She blocked my solar panel installation 3 times despite it meeting all county requirements, then suggested her brother's construction company could help get it approved for a consultation fee of $5,000. He set down his glass with purpose. "What do you need to make this happen?" Michael became not just an ally but a partner in the plan. When I explained the strategy to acquire the road, he immediately offered financial backing. "Legal battles are expensive," he said, "and Corinne has been using HOA funds to fight residents who challenge her. Let me level the playing field." His resources allowed us to move much more quickly than I could have alone. With Thomas guiding the legal framework, we established Willow Creek Property Management, LLC, a legitimate property management company with me as the primary owner and Michael as a silent partner. The company had proper articles of organization, tax identification, and business licensing, all filed with appropriate government entities. This was not a shell company but a real business entity capable of owning and managing property. Throughout this process, I maintained normal, cordial interactions with Corinne whenever our paths crossed. I even attended HOA meetings, raising no further objections about my gate situation, allowing her to believe I had resigned myself to compliance. At one meeting, she actually smiled smugly in my direction when announcing new landscaping restrictions. Little did she know that while she was focused on micromanaging garden gnomes and fence heights, we were methodically executing a plan that would fundamentally change the power dynamic of the entire community. The most difficult part was maintaining secrecy. The plan required absolute discretion until all legal elements were in place. With each new ally who joined our cause, the risk of exposure increased. I impressed upon everyone the importance of confidentiality. "If Corinne gets wind of this before we secure legal ownership," I explained, "she will find a way to block it." Our group understood the stakes and maintained impressive discipline, keeping conversations contained to private settings and secure communications. By the end of 2 months, we had assembled everything needed for the next critical phase: a solid legal foundation, documented evidence of HOA abuses, financial resources to sustain a potential legal battle, and a community of supporters waiting in the wings. The pieces were in place. Now it was time to make our move. The morning of our acquisition filing dawned clear and bright. I had barely slept the night before, running through potential scenarios and contingency plans. Thomas had prepared all necessary documentation for Willow Creek Property Management, LLC, to claim ownership of the private road that served our community, a road that had never been properly transferred to HOA control despite Corinne's assumption of authority over it. The county records office opened at 8:00 a.m. I arrived at 7:45, finding Martha already at her desk preparing for the day. She gave me a knowing nod as I approached with a thick folder of documents. "Big day?" she asked quietly. I simply nodded in response, my heart pounding with nervous anticipation. Filing for ownership of abandoned or orphan property involves a complex legal process. Because the original development company had dissolved years ago without properly transferring the road to the HOA, and because no property taxes had been paid on this parcel for over a decade, state law allowed for a claim of ownership through a specific petition process. Thomas had carefully prepared our claim based on these provisions, including evidence that Willow Creek Property Management, LLC, had legitimate interest in the property and intended to maintain it for community use. Martha guided me through the filing process with professional efficiency. Each document received an official stamp, each form was checked for completeness, and finally, the application was entered into the county system. The most crucial moment came when the clerk pressed the heavy seal onto the provisional title document, establishing our company as the petitioner for road ownership pending the mandatory 30-day public notice period. "The notice will be published in the county legal journal tomorrow," Martha explained. "After 30 days, if no valid counterclaims are filed, ownership can be formally transferred to your company." She gave me a subtle smile. Not many people check the legal notices section. With the initial filing complete, we moved to the next phase of our plan. Thomas had prepared proper private property, access by permission only signs that met legal requirements without being visually intrusive. The following weekend, Michael and I installed these small but visible markers at key points along Willow Creek Road. The signs did not restrict access but legally established our pending claim and right to control usage of the property. It took precisely 27 hours for Corinne to notice the signs. I was working in my front garden when I saw her marching down the street, her face already flushed with anger, designer sunglasses pushed up into her perfectly styled hair. I continued calmly planting bulbs as she approached. "What is the meaning of these ridiculous signs?" she demanded without preamble, her voice carrying across my property. "You have no authority to place signage on community property." I stood slowly, brushing soil from my hands. "Good morning, Corinne," I replied calmly. "Those signs were placed by Willow Creek Property Management, the company that has filed for legal ownership of the road." Her expression shifted from anger to confusion. "That is absurd. The HOA owns and maintains the road." "Actually," I continued in the same measured tone, reaching into my pocket, "the HOA never legally acquired ownership when the development company dissolved. I have the documentation right here if you would like to review it." I held out a folder containing copies of our filing documents. Corinne stared at the folder but did not take it, Her complexion had paled slightly beneath her carefully applied makeup. "This is some kind of joke," she said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. "You will be hearing from our attorney." She turned abruptly and began walking away. "Corinne," I called after her. She paused without turning around. "You might want to check the county records before you incur legal expenses. Everything has been properly filed." She said nothing in response but pulled out her phone as she continued down the street. I could see her hands shaking slightly as she dialed. The first confrontation had gone exactly as Thomas had predicted, initial disbelief followed by threats of legal action. Now we waited for the next move. That evening, my phone began ringing with calls from neighbors. Corinne had apparently been going door to door, telling residents that I was attempting to privatize our community road and warning of restricted access and possible tolls. Rather than deny anything, I simply invited concerned neighbors to come by for coffee the next day, where I could explain the situation fully. By noon the following day, my living room was filled with curious and concerned residents. Michael was there as my partner in Willow Creek Property Management, and Thomas had joined via video call to address legal questions. I laid out the entire situation transparently. How the road had never been legally transferred to HOA ownership. How Corinne had been exercising authority she did not legally possess. And most importantly, our intention to ensure fair access for all legitimate residents. "The company has no intention of restricting your access or charging unreasonable fees," I explained. "Our goal is simply to ensure that the road is properly maintained and that no single entity can use it as a tool for control." The tension in the room noticeably decreased as people understood our intentions. Mrs. Wilson spoke up from her seat by the window. "So this means Corinne cannot tell us what we can and cannot do on our own properties anymore." The hope in her voice was palpable. "Not based on road access or supposed HOA ownership of common areas," Thomas confirmed from the video screen. "Her authority would be significantly reduced." By the end of the meeting, most neighbors had shifted from concern to cautious support. The years of Corinne's heavy-handed rule had created more resentment than I had realized. People left with a new understanding of the situation, and importantly, no one seemed inclined to challenge our filing during the public notice period. The following week passed in tense anticipation. Corinne had indeed consulted with an attorney who sent a strongly worded but legally vague cease and desist letter. Thomas responded with a detailed point-by-point refutation, including copies of all relevant documents proving our legal standing. The HOA attorney did not respond further, a telling silence that suggested he had recognized the validity of our position. As the 30-day public notice period neared its conclusion with no valid legal challenges filed, Corinne made one last desperate attempt. She called an emergency HOA meeting, mandatory for all residents. The community center was packed that evening, with tension thick in the air as people took their seats. Corinne sat at the front table alongside a different attorney than the HOA usually employed, this one from a prestigious firm in the nearest city. I sat quietly in the back row, Thomas beside me this time in person, both of us prepared for whatever might come next. The acquisition that had begun with nervous anticipation at the county records office was about to face its final test. The community center hummed with tense energy as residents filed in for the emergency meeting. Every seat was taken, with additional people standing along the walls. I had never seen such attendance at an HOA meeting. Corinne sat at the front table looking unnaturally composed, her attorney arranging documents with meticulous precision beside her. The expensive suit and leather portfolio marked him as a high-priced legal gun brought in specifically for this confrontation. Karen called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice projecting practiced authority. "As many of you have heard, there has been an attempt by certain parties to claim ownership of our community road through what I can only describe as legal trickery." Her gaze briefly flicked toward me. "I have asked Mr. Bradford from Harlow, Bradford and Myers to address this situation and explain why it has no legal merit." The attorney stood, adjusting his tie before speaking. He was tall with silver hair and the confident demeanor of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. "Good evening," he began. "I will keep this straightforward. The claim filed by Willow Creek Property Management is based on a technicality that will not withstand legal scrutiny. While it is true that certain paperwork regarding road ownership was not properly completed years ago, the HOA has exercised de facto control for over 15 years, establishing constructive ownership through continuous maintenance and management." He continued for nearly 20 minutes, his presentation filled with legal terminology and references to obscure precedents. He spoke with absolute certainty, painting our claim as frivolous and destined to fail in court. He concluded by announcing that the HOA would be filing an emergency injunction the following morning and seeking punitive damages for community disruption and legal expenses. "Any questions?" Karen asked when her attorney finished, clearly expecting none. Thomas nodded slightly to me. It was time. I raised my hand and stood before being acknowledged. "Yes, I have a question," I said, my voice steadier than I expected given my racing heart. "If the HOA's position is so legally sound, could you explain why the county recorder has already processed our ownership claim this afternoon, 3 days before the waiting period was set to expire?" The room fell completely silent. Karen's attorney appeared momentarily confused, rifling through his papers as if searching for information he should have been given. Thomas stood beside me. "Perhaps I can clarify," he said, opening his briefcase. "I am Thomas Blackwell, representing Willow Creek Property Management. This afternoon, the county recorder expedited our claim after determining no valid legal objection had been filed during the public notice period. I have certified copies here of the final ownership transfer, officially recorded as of 3:42 p.m. today." He walked to the front of the room, placing the documents on the table before Karen and her attorney. "You will note the official seal and signature of the county recorder. Willow Creek Road is now legally owned by Willow Creek Property Management, LLC." The attorney picked up the documents, examining them with increasing concern visible on his face. He leaned over to whisper something to Karen, whose composed facade finally cracked. Her face flushed as she whispered back furiously. "This changes nothing," Karen announced to the room, her voice slightly higher than before. "The HOA has legal standing to challenge this transfer based on established precedent." "Actually," Thomas continued calmly, "there is another matter that should be addressed before discussing potential challenges." He produced another set of documents. "During our research, we discovered that numerous HOA bylaw amendments filed over the past year, including those expanding architectural review authority and increasing fine structures, were never properly notarized as required by state law. Furthermore, there is no record of these amendments receiving the required 67% homeowner approval, mandated by both state statute and the HOA's own charter." The attorney took these documents as well, reviewing them with growing alarm. The whispered exchange with Karen became more intense, with the attorney now doing most of the talking. I returned to the center of the room. In light of these findings, Willow Creek Property Management, as the legal owner of the community's access road, will be implementing a new usage policy. The room felt electric with tension as I continued. As property owner, we have the legal right to establish reasonable terms for road access and usage. Karen stood abruptly. "This is extortion," she exclaimed. "You cannot restrict access to people's homes." "No one is restricting access," I clarified. "But private property owners may establish reasonable usage terms. Our attorney has confirmed this is well within our legal rights." Thomas nodded in agreement. The courts have consistently upheld the right of private road owners to establish access terms as long as they are not discriminatory or unduly restrictive. The atmosphere in the room had shifted dramatically. Where Karen's attorney had initially dominated with confident assertions, he now appeared defensive, huddled with his client reviewing documents that had clearly caught him by surprise. Several residents were whispering to each other, many looking at Karen with expressions ranging from concern to barely concealed satisfaction. I laid out the basic framework of the access policy that would be implemented. All current residents would maintain access rights through a simple agreement with Willow Creek Property Management. The company would assume responsibility for road maintenance and improvement. And yes, there would be a nominal access fee structure based on property